Hey, ghoul friend, it's me, Adrian, or Ayden. Either way, I am still your host, and you are still listening to Susto, the podcast of paranormal folklore from Latin America. Welcome back. All right, let me address the giant elephant in the room. A couple things to address. Number one, listen, I am sorry about the last episode or the lack of a last episode. This is part of a larger conversation that we're going to have today. I'm just going to go for it. I'm just going to let it rip. I'm going to rip it off like a Band-Aid, and I hope that you all will understand that first and foremost, Susto has always been an independent production. Jeff stepped in this last year to help me with writing, which has been a huge help, and yet it is still a massive undertaking to produce this show at the level that I want to produce, which is, that gives you a peek into my brain, is that this is an independently produced show. I can do whatever I want, and I somehow figure out a way to put this immense amount of pressure on myself. With that being said, I just needed the last few weeks off, and it was, I hate using the word bad, but it was so intense. That's the word I'll use. It was so intense that I couldn't even bring myself to address it, to create a graphic and post online. And it's been a lot. And it's not like we're okay. We are fine. We're doing good. It's just sometimes it feels extremely overwhelming. So I thank you for your patience. If you probably didn't even notice that I was gone, and I'm glad, that's good. Go about your life. I'm just letting you know. I had to take a break, and I just had to disappear for a couple weeks. With that being said, there's this idea of scaling back that is going to happen right now. It's in the stars. I feel like they are speaking to me. I am scaling back. So first things first is I'm breaking up the band. I am disbanding the book club. However, I will continue to share what I am reading. I will continue posting this is what I'm reading right now. This is maybe this is how I feel about it. This is whatever. It's just having to keep up with everything else and then putting that on my plate was a foolish thing to do. Hey, we did it for a while. It was really fun. However, we're putting that on, let's say, pause for right now. Because again, so we're scaling back. Another part of the scaling back is I'm reverting back to audio only. Listen, I am the king of making an announcement and being this great, super cool thing is happening, and then tripping over myself and being never mind. That's part of the conversation of a lot happening, of taking on more than I want to. My eyes are hungrier than my stomach. My ambition is greater than what realistically is sustainable. So we are scaling things back. I am not doing video episodes for the foreseeable future. However, there are still other perks and benefits that you can gain as a subscriber to sustoplus.com, also known as the Patreon. One of those is early and ad-free episodes. And when I do happen to do video content, I'm not saying there's never going to be video content ever again. I actually have something already recorded on video that's going to be coming out in a few weeks. That will be exclusive access on Patreon. It'll be ad-free on Patreon. So yes, video content will probably continue in some form in the future. I just it's not sustainable at this moment to do it for every single episode. So reverting to audio only, scaling things back. Now onto something exciting. It's very sustainable. I just have to implement the change, and I don't have to, it's not going to be this huge undertaking. Is you may have noticed, and if you are following online, that's at Susto Podcast on every social media platform, that there is new cover art. This has been in the works for several months. I worked with an artist known as Lux Fatale. You can check out luxfatale.card with 2 R's.co. And that will be linked in the description of this episode. I will also tag her on the social media posts where I post those. I'm so excited for this art. Lux was amazing, worked with me, was super transparent every step of the way in producing this new art. So I'm so excited. It's the first 2 iterations of the Susto cover art, I designed them myself. I dabble in graphic design, and I did the best that I could. And I had finally gotten to this point where I was all right, this is the next, we need to evolve again. It's time. And I commissioned an artist. I commissioned Lux, and she did a fantastic job. Just looking at the photo now, it is gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's so vibrant. It feels more me. I'm like, all right, I feel like I'm like leaning into what I feel is the character and the vibe and the aesthetic of Susto. This feels more in line with that. So you let me know what you think. Let me know how much you love it, because I know you don't hate it. So let me know how much you love it, what you love about it. Make sure to check out Lux's page. And also, fun fact, I kind of like, I don't know if this counts as an Easter egg, but Lux and her husband also have a podcast called Ghost Beast, and we did an episode swap with them a few months ago. Their mission over at Ghost Beast is to watch every single horror film, and they do such fun retellings of them. It's in line with Wiki Horror, which is another one of my favorite podcasts, and you know that Wiki Horror covers all Latin American horror films. Ghost Beast, they said that they're doing it. They've got a long list to watch every horror movie. So go check them out. I love their podcast, and I love the art that Lux developed for us. I can't stop looking at it. It's so beautiful. I'm so excited to share the art with you. So hopefully it didn't confuse anyone and people were like, what the hell is that? But it's pretty clear, the title is front and center. I'm gushing about it. I love it so much. Anyway, we're going to move on. Those are, I think, all the major announcements for the show. You can support Susto by following along for any and all updates like the ones that I just shared here on @Susto Podcast on every social media platform. Engage wherever you are listening as well. That's one of the easiest ways to support. It's free as well, by leaving positive and rating reviews, by leaving comments like this one from Sheila on the original Dancing with the Devil episode. Sheila said, yes, I read that story in the book, Stories That Must Not Die. Sheila, I'm not sure if you've caught up, if you've seen it, but I did. Well, first of all, I have that book, and it's the actual physical hardcover copy of the book from my elementary classroom. I talk about it all the time on here, and I have the sword on the cover of that book. I have it tattooed on my right forearm. I'm sure it's been on social media, of course. So yeah, I love this book. I love talking about this book. It has been such a huge influence on my life and on the work that we do here at Susto. So yes, I was so excited. I always get excited when people are like, I know that book. I know what you're talking about, because I got it. I love it. And thank you it seems like you may be listening through the episode. So I don't know from the beginning. So I don't know when you'll get to this one, but hopefully that'll be soon. And thank you for listening. I hope that you're enjoying it so far. Daphne, however, on the other hand, on the River of Death episode commented, wow, this has been the most upsetting episode. Daphne Marie, just you wait. Unfortunately, it gets worse in other episodes too. They continued and they said, this was heartbreaking and infuriating. Good episode. Daphne, thank you so much. That River of Death episode that one, it's like an ecological horror, if we had to classify it. It's definitely about environmental racism and pollution and climate change, which it truly is horrifying. It really is scary. We're in the thick of it. It's happening. Look at what happened in Paris recently. Speaking of, Pride Month just ended recently, although it's Pride year every day 365. I'm super gay. However, speaking of Paris is burning, they were like burning up in Europe, which is like unprecedented temperatures. I'm not going to go into it. If you want to hear more about ecological horror, you can listen to the River of Death episode. Those two will be tied in the description below, of course. And as always, please make sure that you send in your stories using the submit story button on sustopodcast.com. It doesn't have to be just a written story. You can also send in a video, a photo, an EVP if you happen to grab one. And they will be featured either on social media or on a Letters from the Beyond episode. So again, make sure to click that button and send in your stories. And as always, as I mentioned earlier, you can sign up for exclusive and bonus content on sustoplus.com. Let's get on with today's episode. I hope that you enjoy it. We will be speaking about the Isla de Mezcala. There is an island in the middle of Mexico's largest lake that has been soaked in blood for hundreds of years. The small island sits in Lake Chapala, in the state of Jalisco, about 20 minutes by boat from the shore. On a clear day, you can see it from the waterfront of the town of Mezcala, rising dark and quiet out of the water. The ruins of a stone fortress are still visible. There are no permanent residents. The island has been officially abandoned for over a century and a half. But locals will tell you it's not empty. The people who live on the lakeshore, the fishermen, the guides, the families who have called this region home for generations, will tell you that the island remembers everything that has ever happened on it, and what has happened on it is enough to keep the dead from resting. Long before the Spanish arrived, long before the land was called Mexico, this island was already considered sacred. The people who first claimed the island around 1280 CE were connected to the same civilization that built the Guachimontones, the great circular pyramids of Jalisco that still stand today, rising in perfect concentric rings from the earth. These were sophisticated people, engineers and astronomers, and deeply spiritual. And to them, this island was not simply a piece of land in a lake. It was a threshold, a place where the world of the living pressed up against something else. There is a structure on the island still called the Torre del Caballero Alto, or the Tower of the High Knight. It is an ancient yellow structure just visible from the water, most recently used as a watchtower. Locals say this was a center of torture in pre-Hispanic times, a place where sacrificial rites were performed. The obsidian blades found buried in the soil of this island were not for cutting vegetables. They were ritual instruments, the kind used in ceremonies where the boundary between a human life and whatever came after it was deliberately, ceremonially crossed. The island was, by every account, an altar. Blood had spilled here in the name of the divine. The lake received those offerings, and in the cosmology of the indigenous peoples of the region, a place that receives the dead becomes a kind of door. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they built a Catholic chapel on the island. This was not unusual. The strategy of the colonial church was to construct Christian buildings directly on top of indigenous sacred sites, and to overwrite them, to replace one spiritual presence with another. But on this island, the chapel was built on the exact spot where sacrifices had been made to the old gods and ancestors. Their idols were thrown into the lake. Every ritual tool, every carved stone face, every figure that had been venerated for generations, cast into the water. Whether or not you believe such things carry weight, it's worth considering what it means to the spirits of a place when you drown their gods. By the early 1800s, the indigenous people living along the shores of Lake Chapala had been living under Spanish colonial rule for nearly 3 centuries. The cruelties imposed on them were not abstract. They were daily, physical, and grinding. Forced labor, land seizure, violence with no consequence for those who inflicted it. In 1812, a young fisherman named Encarnacion Rosas had enough. He was not a politician or a trained soldier. He was a man who pulled fish from this lake for a living. He gathered about 60 men, fishermen, farmers, indigenous villagers armed with lances, sticks, and rocks, and initiated an uprising. The Spanish sent troops to crush the rebellion. Encarnacion Rosas and his men defeated them, killing 60. Word spread, and the uprising grew. A former Catholic priest named Marcos Castellanos, a man who had already renounced his allegiance to the colonial order and joined the independence movement, arrived on the island with more insurgents. Together, they did something extraordinary. They turned this small, floating altar on the lake, into an impenetrable fortress. They worked with remarkable ingenuity. They built defensive walls right at the waterline, just beneath the surface, invisible to approaching boats. They built a second set of walls at the beach's edge. A third ring of fortifications protected the interior structures. They positioned cannons on a tiny adjacent island, an outer defensive platform set just off the main shore. Spanish ships came to break the siege. They were not ordinary vessels for the lake. Some were dismantled, hauled over from the ocean, and reassembled piece by piece on the lake, specifically to retake this island. But then they ran aground on the submerged walls. The rebels watched them flounder from the shore and recovered weapons, canoes, and ammunition from the wreckage. For 4 years, a few hundred indigenous men and women held off the full military force of the Spanish colonial government. The people in the lakeside villages secretly supplied the rebels at night by rowing out under the cover of darkness with food, ammunition, tools, and medicine. They knew the risk. When the Spanish discovered this network of support, their response was medieval in its brutality. They burned every crop along the shores of Lake Chapala, every field, every garden, every store of grain. They starved the rebels from the outside in. By 1816, 8,000 Spanish troops surrounded the island. The defenders were sick and starving. Their wounds were infected. Disease moved through the fortress and people died. But none of them surrendered. Not one. They refused every offer, every demand, every ultimatum. When the end finally came in November of 1816, it came not from defeat in battle, but from the slow murder by starvation and illness. Marcos Castellanos and the Spanish commander José de la Cruz agreed on terms. The rebels would surrender. In exchange, they would be pardoned. They would be allowed to return to their homes freely. When the Spanish entered the island, they found 16 cannons, stockpiles of weapons, and approximately 800 men, barely alive. The Spanish commander, by all historical accounts, was moved. He ordered food brought to the island to feed the malnourished warriors. He upheld the terms of the surrender. He let them go. Historians note that this was the first time in the entire Mexican War of Independence that the Spanish had granted a conditional surrender. This was the first time, in years of exterminating and pitiless war, that they had not executed their prisoners. It seemed, for a moment, like grace. But it was not. José de la Cruz was not a merciful man. He was known throughout New Spain for his cruelty and bloodthirsty methods. He had let the rebels go, but he had not forgiven them. In 1817, 1 year after the surrender, he ordered a new structure built on the island. Not a monument to the brave indigenous defenders, not a memorial to what had happened here. A prison. The message was simple and deliberate. You won the battle, but we own this island. And if you ever think of taking it back, this is what waits for you. The fortress the rebels had built was repurposed. New construction was added of a moat, drawbridges, embrasures for weapons, and firing ranges. The structure that emerged was called El Presidio. It was the only work of formal military architecture ever built in the territory of Jalisco. It was designed to be inescapable. It was designed, above all, to be a warning. The prison received its first inmates in 1826 and continued operating until 1855. The facility had 4 wings arranged around a central cobblestone courtyard, 28 cells, 2 circular watchtowers, a drawbridge over a deep perimeter moat so that even reaching the entrance required crossing a gap over open water, the lake visible below you on all sides. The dormitories held 20 to 30 prisoners per room. But locals who know this island's history say the dungeons were different. The deep cells could hold up to 250 people in a single enclosure. 250 people in one cell on an island in a lake. There is no kindness in that number. That is not incarceration, that is something else. The prisoners sent to Mezcala were drawn from the communities along the shores of Chapala and Michoacan, the same communities that had once supported the rebellion. They were people who had stepped out of line, who had defied the colonial order, who had committed the crime of challenging the authority of those who ruled them. The most common offense recorded in the prison's official documents covered a wide range of crimes against the social order, including any act perceived as a violation of the rights of the powerful. The prisoners lived in what contemporary accounts describe as extreme and repugnant conditions. There was no adequate food, no clean water, no medical care. Disease moved through the cells constantly. People died slowly, of illness, of starvation, of infected wounds, of despair. Others died attempting to escape by throwing themselves from the walls into the lake, only to be pulled back or drowned. There was no appeal. There was no recourse. You were on an island. The water surrounded you on every side. The Spanish garrison held the only boats. The chapel on the island, built on the site of the old sacrificial ground, took on a new and terrible meaning during these years. Prisoners went there not just for prayer, but for penitence, for formal, physical punishment in the name of God. The most common voluntary penance performed in that chapel was a 3-day fast. Starving men chose to go without food for 3 days to demonstrate their contrition. In that context, the word voluntary deserves a long look. The chapel also served as a burial ground. People were interred there inside and around it. Beneath the stones where prayers were said, bodies were laid into the island's soil. When El Presidio finally closed in 1855, the island fell quiet. The Spanish military's presence dispersed. The prisoners who were there had all either been sent away or died. The island was abandoned. But here's the thing about a place where this much suffering has accumulated. The suffering does not leave just because the people do. The island has been essentially uninhabited for over 150 years. The ruins are still there. The stone walls, the moat, the towers, the chapel with its collapsed roof, the Cuartel Viejo or the old barracks, where cannonballs were cast from molten metal during the war, its quadrangular walls still standing in their Baroque style, though crumbling now. The Torre del Caballero Alto, ancient and yellow, watching the lake. And the stories. Talk to the people at the pier in Mezcala, the fishermen, the boat operators who carry tourists out to the island during the day and who do not linger past sunset. Ask them what they've heard, what they've seen, what their elders told them about this place. They will tell you about the sounds from the old barracks, late at night, when the lake is still and the tourist boats have long since returned to shore. You can hear it. A knocking. Rhythmic. Deliberate. Like something chipping stone. Like someone still working. The people who live closest to the island say it has been heard for generations. Always the same sound. Always coming from the same ruined walls where the prisoners once broke rock and cast metal for cannons they would eventually be killed by. Who is still working in those ruins alone in the dark? They will tell you about the child. There is a child who cries on the island, not in one place, everywhere, in every corner, in every passage through every ruined room. A child's voice, weeping, never finding comfort, never stopping. No one has ever found a source for it. The locals say it is the spirit of a child who died there, and given the history of this place, the question of which child or how many is not a comfortable one to sit with. They will tell you that the cells of the old presidio feel different. They remain cold and empty, but there is always a sense that something else occupies the space with you. That walking through the dormitories, through the tight corridors between the ruins, you have the sensation of being watched by something that does not want you there. That the air in the cells has a quality of pressure, of presence, of accumulated anger that has nowhere to go. The island operates nighttime tours now. The local guides who lead them have their own stories. They talk about things they have heard while walking the grounds after dark, shapes they have seen in the towers, movement when the hair rises on their arms, and they know, with a certainty they cannot entirely explain, that something is aware of them. The souls of the prisoners, the legends say, have not left. They are still in those cells, still in those corridors, still doing penance for sins they may have not committed, still trapped on an island they could not escape in life. In one of those nighttime tours, they warn you not to stare at the walls for too long. Dark, pained faces will appear on the wall between the flickering of lights. The pain of those prisoners forever trapped in the stone walls of the dungeon. And deeper still, beneath the prison layers, beneath the colonial chapel, beneath the insurgent fortress are the older presences, the ones who were there on the island before the Spanish arrived, before the rebellion, before the prison, the ones whose idols were thoughtlessly thrown into the lake, the ones whose blood fed this soil, those who performed the rites at the Torre del Caballero Alto when the world was younger and the lake was a threshold between one world and another. This island has been a site of killing for 700 years. In Mexico, people know that the dead are not entirely gone, and the world of the living and the world of the dead are not as separate as we might prefer. A place like this does not empty out. It fills, layer upon layer, blood upon blood. The lake holds it all. The island sits in the middle of it. And at night, when the last boat has gone, and the water goes dark and still, something on Isla Mezcala is still awake, knocking, weeping, waiting. For what, we don't know. Maybe for an apology that will never come. Maybe just to be heard. Welcome back, Wolf friends. Thank you so much for listening to that episode. Let's go ahead and jump into our sources here. First, I do want to address, though, there were not super concrete sources. So there was a bit of creative writing, as we do here on the show. And I just want to clarify it as to not perpetuate any sort of like stereotypes or anything. There were a few sources that mentioned that there was in fact some form of bloodletting or ritual sacrifice that happened specifically on this island and with the indigenous people that lived on what is now known as Jalisco or Mexico, right? So that did happen. However, it did not happen at the same frequency as it did with other peoples. And I think, and we're going to talk about them here, but I want to say that the main indigenous group or the main indigenous group of peoples that inhabited this area were known as the Coca people, and we will be talking about them in a source here. I just wanted to clear that up, that yes, some form of bloodletting, some form of ritualistic human sacrifice happened, but it was very rare, if at all. So just laying the foundation for that. Speaking of laying the foundation, our first source is from mayacomunicacion.com.mx, and this is about Mezcala Island, the mysterious destination you must visit in Jalisco. And this is sort of a condensed history of the island, and we're going to be getting into a more thorough history, but I want to give the condensed version. So this is a very historical episode. This is very much based on true events on a real place. And this says, in the heart of the imposing Lake Chapala, Mexico's largest lake, lies the enigmatic Mezcala Island, a destination that blends history, mystery, and authentic flavors. Though its atmosphere is steeped in legends and ghost stories, the island has become a perfect attraction for those seeking a unique family getaway. Which is very interesting considering the history of this place, right? As we just heard in the story, there's war that happened here, there's death that happened here all the way to pre-Columbian times. So bring the family, right? But this continues. Mezcala Island, just 50 minutes from the picturesque magic town of Ajijic, covers less than 20 hectares, but holds centuries of history and secrets waiting to be discovered. Also known as Presidio Island, it was founded in 1280 and became an important center of worship during the 14th century. So what, like over 1800 years ago? That's crazy. Archaeological remains found there, such as obsidian points and ceramic pieces, suggest that the island may have been inhabited by the same civilization that built the famous Guachimontones in Jalisco. And I will be talking about the Guachimontones in their own source, but as mentioned in the story, it's this kind of like pyramid structure, but the pyramid is built of like circular layers. And the ones, like, if you look them up now online, I'll post a picture on the social post for this episode, is they're covered, like, they look like hills because they're covered by grass. I don't know if they've always been covered by grass, if they were built that way, or if that's just like nature took over. And there may be, but it also looks like from the side as if they're made from rock. So you can check out a picture of that online, and we're going to talk about those more in a second. But this continues. One of the most significant moments in the history of Isla Mezcala occurred during the Mexican War of Independence, when it became an insurgent stronghold. For 4 years, the rebels valiantly defended their fortification against royalist attacks. Over time, the military structure known as El Fuerte was transformed into El Presidio, a prison for the region's most dangerous criminals. Today, Mezcala Island is a destination steeped in tales of terror and legend. It is said that the souls of former prisoners will still wander the halls and cells of the old prison. So, definitely haunted, a haunted place. And as we say almost every episode, where there is history, there is haunting. Ooh, I don't think I've said it like that before, but that's really good. Where there is history, there is haunting. And a lot of history happened here, and a lot of intense history, war, literal war, lots of death, and then prison, which are, of course, as we know, just prisons are structures of torture. And so, yeah, of course, like there has to be this traumatic impact on this space. This continues. Furthermore, the island features a small cave that serves as a shrine dedicated to Our Lady of San Juan de los Lagos, and a chapel built with unusual materials such as volcanic rock and animal remains, where ancient religious rituals were performed. For adventure lovers, Isla Mezcala offers much more than history. The old barracks, a collection of ruins once used for weapons manufacturing, and the Tower of the Tall Knight, a yellow structure that served as a torture center in pre-Hispanic times, are must-see attractions. Again, like must-see attraction, torture center, and all this and that. But there are photos here from and around the island, and it does look beautiful. It's an island, right? It's hard for an island to not look beautiful, especially with the sunset in the background, but yeah, we have another source here from Wikipedia, and this is also more history about the island. So there's a lot of what we just read in the Maya Comunicación source, but I want to talk more of the Virgin of the Tree of Life and the specific structures on this island. So this one, it says, on Mezcala Island, there is a very representative sculpture of a virgin known as the Virgin of San Juan de los Lagos, or the Virgin of San Juan of the Lakes, right? That's what that translates to. Yes. Located under the tree of light, which represents with its roots and trunk the figure of an elephant. So yeah, it's just this big tree that is said to look like an elephant. I think I kind of see it. I think I see the one branch over on the left of this photo that looks like an elephant's trunk. But yeah, apparently this is a structure, this is a shrine to the Virgen that is on this island. And it says, it is said that this Virgin Mary statue was made by the indigenous people who inhabited the island during the colonial era. The ribbons represent the colors used in the traditional clothing worn by the women of Mezcala for their dances. Then it talks about the chapel. It says the chapel on Mezcala Island was the original site of the Virgin of San Juan de los Lagos, where people prayed and where they performed voluntary penances. Again, the voluntary penances, which may or may not have been super voluntary. The most common being a 3-day fast. It is said that some people were buried there. The island's inhabitants were considered very devoted to the Virgen of San Juan de los Lagos. Then it talks about the fort. The fort, the island's main attraction, has a drawbridge at the entrance, since under the bridge and around the entire fort there is a double-sloped perimeter moat. So essentially it's like a moat, but it's like a V. So each side is at a slope, it's at an incline. So if people fall in, it's hard for them to climb out, right? Or if you go in trying to climb the wall, it's gonna be hard to get out. And then one side of it goes like all the way up to a wall. And so it's like you really cannot climb over it if you get into this moat. Unless you had like from the cartoons, there's like that rope with, it looks like a giant fish hook, you throw it over the wall. It's very Looney Tunes style, what I'm imagining, but that sort of thing. And again, the moat was installed after not the surrender, I guess the surrender, but after they made their agreement to end the battle there, that 4-year battle. This continues. The fort has 4 wings, as we mentioned, and 28 cells surrounding a central paved courtyard, as well as 2 circular watchtowers, one of which is known as San Juan Bautista. It was in this area that the prisoners were housed in dormitories that could accommodate approximately, again, as we said in the story, 20 to 30 people per room, which I'm like, exactly how big were the cells? We don't see that detail here, but 20 to 30 people in one room, that's got to be a big room. If not, that's really inhumane. But again, prisons. This continues. The fort also included a kitchen and punishment cells in addition to a central courtyard. Then the last structure listed here are the Old Barracks. The Old Barracks is a quadrangular building with a central courtyard, which still retains wings, rooms, and buttresses, as well as vestiges of a staircase. There's some sort of oven in the courtyard that I think may or may not have been part of the kitchen, and some Baroque influence in the window sills and ornamental details. So, yeah, as you can imagine, it is just a very, very old structure, a very old place. With that, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. Welcome back. So this next source that I want to get into with you, this is a pretty lengthy one, but this was one of those where, as I mentioned last time, I'm like, oh, this is a lot. If you want to read it, whatever. I, again, highly recommend checking it out, reading it for yourself. But I did do a breakdown of the timeline because this goes into a really detailed timeline of not just the history of the island itself, but the timeline of the battle, the 4-year battle that took place here. And this is from chapala.com. It's called The Battle of Mezcala Island by Robert M. Burnett. And again, you can find direct links to the sources on the Susto Google Docs on sustoplus.com. But we're going to go through this timeline that I took notes on. So for the background on the uprising, in 1812, as mentioned in the story, Encarnacion Rosas, which I think is a beautiful name, Encarnacion. It's so cool and unique, at least to me, right? But it says that Encarnacion, a fisherman from Lake Chapala, recruited about 60 men and rebels against the Spanish rule. It says that his forces, reinforced by insurgents under Jose Santa Anna, which was someone who joined him, defeated the Spanish troops near Mezcala, killing 60 Spanish soldiers. So the Spanish got wind of this happening, of this uprising, and they were like, let's go stamp that out before it gets worse. But they were not ready for these people to put up a good fight. So then the rebels win further battles at San Pedro Itzican and Poncitlan, capturing firearms, cannons, and ammunition. So what you're going to notice in this timeline is that they're having these small-ish battles throughout these 4 years, and each time it's kind of a success for them. Not only are they killing off the Spanish soldiers, but each time they're also acquiring goods. They're getting loots, right? So they win further battles. They end up also capturing firearms, cannons, and ammunition. This says that both Rosas and Santa Ana gather nearly 1,000 men and fortify Mezcala Island as a rebel stronghold, led spiritually and militarily by, and this is exciting to read, I'm sure you heard the name, the former priest Don Marcos Castellanos. Is that my uncle? That is my last name, which I don't think growing up in Texas, it's not an extremely last name. I don't think I've met a ton of people with the last name Castellanos. And when I do, it's always like, hey, oh my God, wow, I hardly see that. I remember one time a few years ago, after I think like a 5K that I ran, this guy walked up to me. He's just said, no way. And he pointed at my bib. Y'all, I kid you not. His name was my name too. John Jacob Jingle Haber Smith. No, his name was Adrian Castellanos. And I was like, holy fuck. I had registered for that run as Adrian Castellanos. And we were just pointing at each other like the Spider-Man meme. I was like, hold on a minute. So anyway, in these early stages, around 1812, Don Marcos Castellanos, who was a former priest, renounced that and maybe not renounced his Catholic belief or his Christian belief, but he renounced, I guess, maybe the Spanish government's actions, and like he was also fighting for the independence of Mexico, right? So here is where the siege really begins. At the end of December 1812, Spanish Governor Don José de la Cruz orders Lieutenant Colonel Ángel Linares to attack the island. So again, Spanish Governor Don José de la Cruz, he's an important player in this. He's kind of calling the shots on behalf of the Spanish government and the Spanish army to try and take down the forces at Isla de Mezcala, right? So at the end of December 1812, he sends Ángel Linares to go and battle with them. Around February 1813 is when the actual battle happens. Linares' assault fails disastrously, and he and his men are captured and later, of course, reportedly executed. So not only did Linares, who was sent over by Don José de la Cruz, did he lose this battle, but him and his men were captured and they were executed. Prisoners of war. I don't know if that counts. Does it count as a prisoner of war? But if they were executed, but they were. So then defenders of the island, they strengthen it again, because each time they won a battle, they just got to keep whatever they captured from those forces. So with Linares' men, they also capture 17 cannons and weapons. José de la Cruz, again, the guy calling the shots for the Spanish military, this says, Cruz reported the action to Viceroy Don Francisco Javier Venegas, then governor of New Spain. In part, quote, when Linares embarked with his 7 canoes, he came too close to the island and was surrounded by more than 70 canoes, and in spite of giving glorious resistance, according to him, was finally the victim of imprudent and unnecessary rashness. Unnecessary rashness? Pot kettle, right? This continues, I cannot please myself with thinking that any of the unfortunate officers and troops are prisoners, because I know the fierceness of those, quote, Indians. We saved only 3 canoes. Cruz pleaded with Viceroy Venegas to send men to replace those lost in his first attack on the island. So, again, as mentioned there, first attack. There was a repeated Spanish attack and fell. In June of 1813, Spanish Colonel Pedro Celestino Negrete leads 1,200 troops against the island, repelled by cannon fire and rocks thrown by the defenders. Again, you could imagine that the Colonel Pedro Celestino Negrete was sent by Don José de la Cruz, again, the guy calling the shots. I'm repeating this so hopefully it'll stick. But Pedro Celestino Negrete, he leads 1,200 men. They are repelled by cannon fire and rocks. So these people were fighting, like, I would say literal tooth and nail if they needed to, but they were using whatever they could at their disposal. So literally using rocks, throwing rocks at them. Negrete, disheartened and embarrassed by the failure of the campaign, asked to be relieved of command of the Spanish forces and was replaced by José Navarro. So there were multiple military leaders who led fights at this island who couldn't win. They kept losing. And this guy probably saved his own life and was like, I cannot do it. He was disgraced and he was swapped out by José Navarro. Then Spain shifts their strategy to a blockade instead of direct assault. And still, the rebels here at Mezcala, they defiantly refuse their surrender. So instead of doing like, we're gonna actually fight, they're like, okay, well, how about we just surround the island and we try and wait it out, essentially, because they knew they were on an island. So they're like, somebody has to be bringing them food at the very least. Like, how can we, basically smoke them out, starve them out? But there's a quote here that I thought was really cool. I wanted to read from this source. It says, they established a rigorous blockade of the island in the hope that the lack of food and supplies would force the insurgents to surrender without further losses of Spanish soldiers and sailors, because they had already lost a bunch of battles and a bunch of people. Cruz then sent an emissary to the island, inviting the defenders to surrender or face the certainty that, quote, much blood would run if they did not accept the offer. To a man, the brave and defiant Indians shouted their reply, quote, let the blood run. Which, that's gaggy. I read that and I was like, that would make a cool tattoo, like a really cool historical badass tattoo. These rebels, they were threatened and they were like, if you don't give up, the blood is going to run. And they were like, all right, let the blood run. Like they said, really do it. I dare you, which is so badass. Anyway, this continues. Ongoing resistance from 1813 to 1814. Santa Ana and Rosas slipped through the blockade nightly to raid Spanish positions. So again, the two of the leaders of this rebellion, Santa Ana and Rosas, they are being blockaded nightly. They are not only trying to sneak food and supplies back into the island, but they're also doing raids at night. They're being really sneaky and they're succeeding. Then we jump to April of 1814, and there is a bloody naval crash near Tuxcueca. Over 100 insurgents were killed/wounded. Again, this is because of those underwater stones and walls that they had built that they could not see from above the water, but if the ships ran into it, then it would damage their ships, right? Then in May of 1814, the next month, Santa Ana leads 30 canoes in a successful attack on Jocotepec, then defeats Spanish troops at Chapala. 70 Spanish troops were killed. Jocotepec is it was a nearby city, I want to say. Yeah, this says more successful for the islanders was the May 25th, 1814 attack on Jocotepec. Santa Ana led a fleet of 30 canoes against the Spanish forces there, forcing them to seek refuge in the church. Learning of a strong Spanish contingent en route to the aid of the besieged Jocotepec garrison, Santa Ana withdrew, but the following day attacked the royalist detachment at the town of Chapala, killing 70 of its members. So they were relentless, and they weren't even just waiting for the fight to come to them. They were like, we're going to go meet them where they're at. We're going to get ahead of this. So not even showing defense, but they were showing really their force and their fierceness, as was mentioned earlier. Then the Spanish pretty much around this time have had they've had enough. They're like, we really need to do something about this. Really just, they keep defeating us every time, right? They're embarrassed. So their forces swell to around 2,000 troops at Tlachichilco, and by 1816, 8,000 troops are surrounding the lake. So they just completely outnumber them. So now it's really a standoff. In the mid-1816, this is when disease and starvation start to ravage the islanders. But again, they continue to refuse surrender. And each time they're given the option, just give up. It's done. You're cooked. But they're like, no, we don't surrender. Even with disease and starvation running rampant on the island, they would not give up. Castellanos, our former priest and probably my uncle, and Cruz eventually negotiate surrender terms. They wanted amnesty, they wanted the return of lands and homes. They also factored into the surrender terms oxen and seed and free sacraments, like religious sacraments. So they were like, all right, you've seen how far we're willing to go, how successful we've been, and we're small but mighty. We're willing to surrender, but only on these conditions. And I think by that point, the Spanish were just so frustrated and embarrassed that they were like, fine. And they handed over. They met their terms. In November 25th of 1816, Cruz took possession of the island. And when he was, I guess, doing the sweep of the island finally on there, they found 16 cannons and around 800 starving survivors. What was really interesting here is people were so confused really. They were taken aback because he fed the survivors and he honored their surrender terms, as I mentioned, which is kind of unheard of at the time. It's the Spanish army, it's Spanish military, right? They were known for being really, really merciless, especially against indigenous people. But this guy, maybe he had, by this point, he had respect for them. I feel like that's really what it was. And this marks the first time in the war that Spain granted a true pardon rather than executing its captured insurgents. And this was considered a major turning point in the Spanish treatment of rebel prisoners. So that is the full timeline of this battle, or this. I don't know. Is it a battle? Because it's part of the war, right? But it was a 4-year separate kind of thing, or thing that was happening with. I don't know. I'm gonna say battle. I don't know if battles last that long. If you know that stuff, if you're a military buff or a history buff, please let me know what this would be considered. It was part of the the war for independence for Mexico, but it was happening in this one island for 4 years. Okay, we're going to take another quick break. Welcome back, Ghoul friends. The next source that we have here, this one, it's another recounting of the history of Mezcala. I'm not going to go super deep into this because it's a lot of the information that we've already given with these earlier sources. However, I wanted to include it because this was written by Jerónimo Palomares, who is an ethnographer. And from reading this source, what I understand is that Jerónimo, also a really cool name, is that Jerónimo is actually from Mezcala or from the area around Mezcala. I believe he uses the word like mezcalero, like he identifies that way, which is also super neat. But this is on a website called Cielo, so it's SCIELO.org.mx, and this is titled, and this has an ISSN number, which I believe ISSN numbers are meant for like publications. Yeah, publications like journals, magazines, and newspapers. And this is titled Mezcala the Untamed Island, or Mezcala the Indomitable Island. I'm going to read the first couple sentences of this, and it says, "As a member of the Mezcala community, I have studied the struggles of our native ancestors, originally from Mezcala de la Asunción, Jalisco. In the fight for independence, our ancestors led by our fellow indigenous man, José Santana, a native of Mezcala, clashed many times with the forces of the Spanish government. It is important to highlight that the insurgent forces of Mezcala were victorious in more than 25 engagements and lost only one battle in which 100 Mezcaltecos died." Mezcaltecos, there you go, that's the word. "These battles took place in the heart of Mezcala, its islands, where the insurgents maintained a victorious resistance for 4 years, from 1812 to 1816, and on the lake and its surroundings, in the town and countryside of Mezcala, on the hills of Divisadero and San Miguel, at Angostura and the Cuitzeo Pass, and at the ports of La Peña and La Bahia." I'm going to jump a little bit ahead. This finishes this first paragraph and says, "Our brave Mezcaltecs were called Indians, rebels, revolutionaries, and insurgents by the Spanish and the population that opposed independence. From Los Reyes, the insurgents brought 13 cannons to the island. There they established gunpowder workshops and prepared the territory with everything necessary for survival." And then this goes on to talk about the battle. And again, this is from an ethnographer who is from the community. And there's also these really beautiful pictures here from the community, I'm assuming, in the surrounding area. And I do want to talk more about Jerónimo himself. At the bottom here, there's a short bio. And it says, "Jerónimo Palomares holds a degree in ethnology from the National School of Anthropology and History. He has participated in group exhibitions at the Museum of Mexico City, the National School of Anthropology and History, the School of Gastronomy, and the 13th Guadalupana Biennial at the San Angel Cultural Center. His work has been featured in several publications, and in 2006, he won 3rd place in the National Anthropological Photography Contest. He is currently working on a photographic project entitled Wandering Pilgrimages." When was this written? Because this is currently, but this was written... I don't see a date of when this was written or published. Oh, 2010. 2010, he was working on that project, that photo project, which is, I'm assuming, what these photos are from, because these are all his photos here as well. But yeah, I just thought it important to include that because that is directly from someone in the community. Then our next source here is from El Universal. There's a section of this that is about the hauntings that I wanted to talk about. This is titled, "What to Do in Mezcala, the Island with Ghosts in Lake Chapala." It says, "Petroglyphs have been discovered on the island, and the walls of its forts have many stories to tell." And a petroglyph, by the way, you think of those, what are they? But they're scratchings or carvings in rocks on their surfaces, and it exposes a lot lighter layer beneath. So it's like an etching almost, but they can be really big or really small. Okay, there's a section of this that talks about like things to do, where to visit on the island. And then if we scroll down here, it talks about the prison, right? And it says, "It was an old dungeon where indigenous prisoners were held during the War of Independence and in subsequent years. The island's inhabitants say that up to 250 people could be crammed into each cell. The prisoners lived in extreme and repugnant conditions. Little by little, They succumbed to disease, lack of food or water, and failed escape attempts. Because of the terror that took place there, they say that souls haunt the presidio. Guides offer nighttime tours for those who enjoy hearing ghost stories. They even say that you can see demonic faces on the walls or feel chills as soon as you set foot in the fortress. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, as we mentioned earlier, lots of trauma in this space, lots of injustice. So I would assume that yes, there's some sort of haunting happening. There's another part of this that says, in the ruins of the old barracks, locals claim that at night they hear knocking sounds, like someone chipping away at stone. Some have also heard a child crying throughout the area. The locals believe these are the spirits of the former inhabitants who refuse to leave. People on the Mezcala pier are the ones who approach you to tell these kinds of stories. So, all kinds of hauntings on this island. Then there's a couple of touristy posts that we thought to include for fun for the people who have access to the Google Docs. I will say though, one of them is from elciudadojalisco.mx, and it's an entry called Mezcala, an island shrouded in legends. Actually, I'm going to read through this one, but we're going to take one final quick break and then come back with these last two sources. Okay, welcome back, Wolf Friends. So I wanted to read through this one because I saw something. I was like, yes, I remember now. We know a lot about, I think, the post-Columbian, the post-Spanish history. Once the battle started and stuff, we talk a little bit about the indigenous people that were there. So this says Mezcala was founded in the 18th century, primarily by the Nahua people who inhabited Jalisco at the time. While this has not been officially confirmed, various artifacts have been found at the site, including obsidian points, ceramic pieces, and ornaments. The area was the site of several battles, as we talked about extensively. It is said that during the early stages of the independence movement, Mezcala Island was the insurgent stronghold, as we know. So I wanted to bring up the people because it talks about Nahua people, and I think that's more of a general term. But there's also the Coca people, and we have a Wikipedia entry here that's about the Coca people, and it says that they are an indigenous people of Mexico who inhabit parts of the state of Jalisco, particularly around Lake Chapala, which is the lake that Mezcala is in, such as the small town right here of Mezcala in the municipality of Poncitlan. John R. Swanton considered the Coca to be a branch of the Kashkan alongside the Tesueche and the Kashkan proper. So the Coca people are part of a branch, or they are a branch of, I think, what is a larger group of indigenous people, the Kashkan. And it says that the Coca language, it's now extinct and it's poorly documented, but the most common hypothesis is that it belonged to the Udo-Aztecan family. So there is some relation there. It's adjacent to the Nahuatl languages, right? The history of the Coca people says that before colonization, the Cocas also lived in the vicinity of modern-day Guadalajara. When the Spanish invaded the territory of the Coca, their leader, Tzitlali, moved them away to a small valley surrounded by high mountains, a place they named Cocolan. Coca people live in an area known today as Cocula, Jalisco. So something really recent that happened was a land dispute in 2018. September 2018, Coca people hoped to recover their seized lands in Mezcala, the target of large-scale real estate projects for U.S. immigrants, resulting in many indigenous lands being illegally seized after 19 years struggling against a Guillermo Moreno Ibarra. So, I mean, as we know, this shit really never ends, right? It never ended. It's still happening. All this shit is stolen, basically. Almost everywhere, but definitely in the Americas. And so, yeah, as recent as 18, there are disputes, official disputes that are happening about this land. The last few things I wanted to talk about were the Guachimontones. This is another Wikipedia entry. A Guachimontone is the largest late formative to classic period pre-Columbian archaeological site in the state of Jalisco, situated in the hills above the town of Teochitlan, that provides the namesake for the culture that built the site. Los Guachimontones is part of the agave landscape and ancient industrial facilities of Tequila UNESCO World Heritage Site and a major tourist attraction within the Tequila valleys. Los Guachimontones is one of several dozen Teochitlan culture sites within the Tequila valleys, though it is by far the largest site in terms of both the number and size of its ceremonial buildings. These buildings, called Guachimontones, singular Guachimontones, Guachimonton after the site name are bullseye-shaped buildings or structures consisting of several distinct architectural elements that constitute a whole structure. There you go. These unique buildings are found primarily in the Tequila Valley, with other examples found in northern Jalisco near Bolaños, Guanajuato to the east and Colima to the south. And so we're bringing this up because they're found in northern Jalisco, which is very near to the Chapala Lake and Mezcala Island. And again, the reason that this was brought up is because some of the artifacts that were found on Mezcala Island point to the peoples who built the Guachimontones and who put these structures up, right? But it's just an interesting kind of fact of like, who were the people that were here on this island? Like, who have they been? Because to be honest, there's a lot of assumptions being made right now, right? We're using we are not professional researchers like that, right? I'm just a person on the internet trying to piece together what I can for you all. But yeah, it's very interesting to see those connections within like different indigenous groups of people. And the last source here, this is from ajijiktrinity.com, and this is just an entry that was actually uploaded 2 years ago called La Isla del Presidio, or Prison Island also. By the way, I'm pretty sure presidio translates to prison. Yeah, different translations for it could be penetration. Different translations for it could be penitentiary or garrison, penal servitude. So yeah, Prison Island. And this one, it's short, but I thought it was important because it brings up an aspect that we talk about in the story, of course. But this says, most people know or have heard of La Isla de los Alacranes, or Scorpion Island, but there is another island not everyone has heard about. Prison Island, also known as Mezcala Island, is a testament of long history where cultures, legends, and ghosts collide. It is believed that it was a center of worship for the civilizations of Jalisco, or pre-Jalisco, since its founding in the year 1280. There have been pre-Columbian traces found on the island, such as obsidian points, ornaments, and ceramic pieces. So again, the types of artifacts that are found here are what are telling us that this was a place of worship. This is a place where certain rituals and rites were performed. This continues later. This island was not only used as a strategic point by the colonial army where a fort had been built to house defense troops, but it also participated in the War of Independence as an independence movement that sympathized with Hidalgo. Finally, the space was used as a prison in the 1980s. Today, it is used as a historical point of interest and welcomes all visitors. The island still has a standing structure and ruins that you can walk through and explore. And with that, we are at the end of our sources. Ghoul friends, thank you so much for listening to today's episode, and thank you for being with me, by my side, and supporting me through every change that happens here on Susto, whether we are building, evolving, or scaling back, as I mentioned earlier. Once more, you can follow online on social media. That's at Susto Podcast on every social media platform to keep up with the things that I'm reading. We will no longer be hosting the book club, but I will definitely share what I'm reading, and I will be taking people's recommendations, and we can have conversations about that in various ways, but it's not going to be formalized. I think I've gotten back into the habit of just enjoying reading for enjoying it, and that's probably a good thing. I think I've come to this place because I have found the joy of reading again, and I don't need to be pressured to do it, and so I don't want to keep that pressure on myself, if that makes sense. But either way, aside from that, another part of scaling back is that we are reverting back to audio only moving forward. Video content will probably still happen from time to time. I'm not going to make you any promises because, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, I don't know what it is about me. I have grand ideas and I'm like, great, let's do it. And I get started and then I'm like, hold on, wait. Also, I don't think I mentioned this earlier. I'm still going to be producing out of Austin Public. This space is amazing. I'm going to stay in the producer program. I will still be uploading my content to their channels. And this also gives me the opportunity for when I do want to do video stuff, I still have access to this space. So yeah, I'm here right now. Actually, I will continue to produce out of here because it's a gorgeous space. So the possibility and the potential for video still exists. I'm not like I'm no longer going to do it because I can't. I just cannot do it for every single episode the way that I've been doing this entire year. Which is honestly, I was like shocked that I did it this long. I was like, wow, pat myself on the back for doing it alone, like the production side of it, because holy shit, it's a lot of work. But that being said, we're scaling things back a bit, and that is okay. However, once more, check out the new art. Let me know how much you love it in the comments. Make sure to check out and follow Lux Fatale online. All of her links to her socials and stuff will be on her website, and that website is linked in the description of the video. It's luxfatale.card.co. Check out Ghost Beast, which is her podcast with her husband, where they are watching every horror movie. It's a great show, and I really enjoy it myself. And aside from that, as always, you can support the show by following along for any updates on social media. You can engage wherever you are listening, leaving positive ratings, reviews, and comments. You can submit your stories to be featured on a Letters from the Beyond episode, or if you have photo, video, or EVP, by visiting sustopodcast.com and hitting that submit story button. And you can receive exclusive and bonus content like early and ad-free episodes. And when video content does happen, that will be for only specific tiers and ad-free on sustoplus.com. And as always, huge thank you to the patron saints on Patreon, on sustoplus.com. The supporters of this episode, you are Liza, Rachel, Alejandra, Luther, April, D, Josette, Mandy, Lori, Jeannie, Desiree C, Ashes, Neressa, Rachel A, Azucena, Marlene, Lainey, Desiree A, Ricardo, Vanessa, Maritza, Manormal, Iris, Flor, Selena, Nightingale, Clint, Rachel W, Armani, Bianca, and Leo. Thank you so much for your support. It means the world to me. Thank you all so much. I will talk to you in the next one. And until then, no te asustes. Bye.